For 342 years, silence was his only companion. He didn't need to breathe, yet the isolation of the manor felt like a slow, freezing suffocation. He was the king of a dying breed, and he lived by one unbreakable rule: never let the humans in. But tonight, fate didn't arrive with a war cry. It arrived with a shy knock on his door. The girl standing in the snow didn't see a predator who could crush armies. She just saw a man spending Christmas alone. To accept her invitation was madness, a direct violation of the ancient laws. But the scent of life she carried was stronger than centuries of discipline. Lysander stepped out of the shadows, unaware that his moment of weakness had been watched. He wasn't just walking into a family dinner. He was leading wolves to the sheep. And when they came for him, they would learn the hard way why you never wake the king. Frost traced intricate patterns across the darkened windows of Vosper Manor, nature's artistry on the canvas of neglect. Lysander stood motionless in the library, a statue among leather-bound volumes untouched for decades. The grandfather clock's pendulum swung with mechanical precision, each tick resonating through empty corridors, the only sound besides the occasional settling of ancient timber. His pale fingers traced the spines of books whose stories he had memorized centuries ago. The December moon cast silver light through the high windows, illuminating dust particles that danced undisturbed in the air. He didn't need to breathe, but habit, that stubborn remnant of humanity, made him inhale, drawing in the scent of parchment, wood polish and emptiness. 342 years. That's how long he had ruled as king of a dwindling kingdom, watching from these windows as the world transformed, while he remained unchanged. The hunger gnawed at him, a dull, familiar ache he had mastered through centuries of discipline. The Ashmolean Synod had warned him that isolation would drive him to madness, but madness seemed preferable to what they offered: a cold eternity of politics and predation. The clock struck midnight, each chime reverberating through his heightened senses. Lysander closed his eyes, focusing on the silence that would follow. But instead, his ears caught something unexpected: the crunch of tires on gravel, the soft purr of an engine approaching the manor gates. Visitors. At this hour, in this weather. He moved to the window with inhuman grace, peering through frost-laced glass. A modest car struggled up the winding drive, headlights cutting through swirling snow. The intrusion felt like a violation of an unwritten contract between himself and the village below. They pretended he didn't exist, and he returned the courtesy. The engine stopped. A car door opened. Lysander's senses sharpened, focusing on the rapid heartbeat of the visitor. Female, young, nervous but determined. Her scent carried on the winter air: honeysuckle soap, wool, and something else. Something warm and alive that made his throat tighten. "Ridiculous," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. The staff had been dismissed weeks ago for the winter, as was his custom. Whoever this was would find no welcome here. Yet she approached, footsteps crunching in the snow, heartbeat accelerating as she neared the imposing front doors. Lysander retreated deeper into the shadows of the library, a habit born of centuries. He would not answer. She would leave. The natural order would resume. The doorbell echoed through the manor, its ancient chime jarring after so much silence. Lysander remained still, counting her heartbeats, waiting for her to surrender to the cold and leave. 1 minute passed. 2. The bell rang again, more insistent. Then came the knocking, determined, rhythmic, and finally, unexpectedly, a voice. "Mr. Vosper, I know you're in there. Mrs. Winters sent me. I'm Eulalia Keris, Liza, your new housekeeper." Lysander's jaw tightened. Mrs. Winters had no authority to send replacements without his approval. This was precisely why he preferred solitude. Humans took liberties, made assumptions, disrupted carefully constructed routines. The agency said you requested staff for the winter months. The voice continued, slightly muffled by the thick oak door. I've come all this way, and it's freezing out here. Please, just open the door. Her heartbeat fluttered like a trapped bird. Lysander could hear her shifting from foot to foot, trying to generate warmth. The temperature had dropped below freezing hours ago. Even through stone walls, he could sense her shivering. Death on his doorstep would be inconvenient. With a resigned sigh that stirred centuries of dust, Lysander moved through the darkened house, each footfall silent on marble floors. At the massive entry hall, he paused, straightening his antiquated waistcoat, another habit he couldn't seem to break. Appearances. Always appearances. He opened the door just enough to reveal himself, keeping most of his tall frame in shadow. The young woman on his doorstep gasped, her breath forming a cloud in the frigid air. Her cheeks were flushed with cold, dark curls escaping from beneath a knitted hat. But it was her eyes that gave him pause, warm, brown, direct, unafraid. "Mr. Vosper?" she asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. "You are mistaken," Lysander said, his voice carrying the faint accent of a homeland long since redrawn on modern maps. "I require no staff this winter." She frowned, pulling a folded paper from her coat pocket. "But the agency, Mrs. Winters specifically said." Mrs. Winters overstepped. "Good evening, Miss Kerris." He began to close the door, but her gloved hand shot out, stopping it. The boldness of the gesture froze him more effectively than any winter chill. "Please," she said, desperation edging into her voice. "I need this position. I've given up my apartment in the city. I have nowhere else to go tonight." Lysander studied her face. No deception there, just genuine distress and determination. Her pulse raced beneath delicate skin, each beat a reminder of what he was and what she was not. The hunger stirred, then subsided beneath centuries of control. "One night," he said finally. "You may stay until morning. Then you will contact Mrs. Winters and sort out this misunderstanding." Relief flooded her features. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Lysander stepped back, allowing her entry into the cavernous foyer. As she crossed the threshold, light from the car's headlamps caught the silver chain around her neck, a small cross that gleamed momentarily before disappearing beneath her scarf. He almost smiled at the irony. "The staff quarters are in the East Wing," he said, gesturing vaguely. "I assume you can find your way." Leah stood in the center of the marble entryway, her small suitcase clutched in mittened hands, taking in the soaring ceilings, the massive chandelier draped in cobwebs, the portraits of stern-faced Vospers lining the walls. "It's not what I expected," she admitted. "Few things are." Lysander turned away. "The kitchen is stocked, though minimally. Help yourself to whatever you require. We will speak in the morning." "Wait," she called, as he began to ascend the grand staircase. "Don't you want to know my qualifications? References?" Lysander paused, looking back at the small figure dwarfed by the grandeur of his ancestral home. "For a position you won't be keeping?" "No, Miss Kerris, I do not." Her face fell slightly, but she squared her shoulders. "Well, I'll just get settled then. Good night, Mr. Vosper." He didn't respond, continuing his ascent into the darkness of the upper floors. Behind him he could hear her heartbeat, steady now, and the soft shuffle of her footsteps as she began to explore her temporary shelter. For the next several hours, Lysander tried to return to his routine, reading by firelight, cataloguing his thoughts in journals that would never be read. But his senses kept straying to the East Wing, tracking the movements of his uninvited guest. She had showered, the ancient pipes groaned in protest, prepared a simple meal, the scent of tomato soup wafted through the manor, and now seemed to be settling into one of the staff bedrooms. Just before dawn, silence finally fell. Lysander closed his book and moved to the window, watching as the first pale light crept over the snow-covered grounds. One day, he would endure her presence for one day, then return to blessed solitude. The following evening found Lysander in his study, irritation building with each tick of the clock. The girl had not left. Instead, she had spent the day cleaning, actually cleaning, the long-neglected kitchen and adjacent rooms. The sharp scent of lemon polish now competed with centuries of dust and decay. Worse, she had attempted to engage him in conversation 3 times, each overture met with monosyllabic responses. Now, as darkness fell once more, he sensed her approaching his sanctuary. Her knock, when it came, was tentative but determined. "Enter," he said, not looking up from his desk. The door creaked open, and Leia stepped inside, her slight frame silhouetted against the dimly lit hallway. She had changed into a simple sweater and jeans, her dark hair pulled back from her face. "I've prepared dinner," she said. "I thought you might join me." Lysander finally looked up, his pale eyes meeting hers. "I don't dine in the evenings. You don't dine at all, from what I can tell." Her observation carried no accusation, merely curiosity. "The refrigerator was untouched before I arrived. My dietary requirements are specific." A flicker of something, not fear but awareness, crossed her features. "I see." She didn't see, of course. How could she? But the moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. "Was there something else?" he asked finally. Leah hesitated, then stepped further into the room. "Actually, yes. I received this today." She held out an envelope, cream-colored and slightly scented. "It's from my grandmother. For you." Lysander made no move to take it. "I don't accept correspondence." "It's not correspondence. It's an invitation." She placed it on his desk. "My family's Christmas gathering. It's a tradition. We invite newcomers to the village. No one should be alone at Christmas." The absurdity of it struck him like a physical blow. Him, Lysander Vosper, ancient king of a blood-soaked lineage, invited to a human family Christmas. "Your grandmother doesn't know me," he said carefully. "She knows everyone," Leah replied with a small smile. "That's her gift. And she specifically asked me to deliver this when she heard I was working here. You're not working here. And yet here I am." Her smile widened slightly. "Please consider it. It would mean a lot to her. To me too." Before he could respond, she turned and left, closing the door softly behind her. Lysander stared at the envelope on his desk, its presence as intrusive as its bearer. After a long moment, he picked it up, detecting the faint scent of cinnamon and aged hands. The Ashmolean Synod had strict rules about human interaction, necessary transactions only, no personal entanglements, certainly no social engagements. The rules existed for a reason, maintained through centuries of painful lessons, and yet Lysander broke the seal and removed the card, handwritten in shaky script. "To the master of Vosper Manor, a place awaits you at our table this Christmas Eve. Warmth and welcome guaranteed. No response necessary, simply arrive. The door will be open. Olympicaries and family." Something long dormant stirred within him, a memory of belonging, of warmth, of voices raised in celebration rather than fear. Dangerous thoughts for one such as he. Lysander placed the invitation in his desk drawer and closed it firmly. The matter was settled. He would not go. 3 nights later, snow fell in thick, silent curtains as Lysander stood at his library window. In the village below, lights twinkled like earthbound stars, warm and inviting. Christmas Eve. The invitation sat open on his desk now, its simple message a challenge to centuries of self-imposed exile. Lycia had left that morning, her small suitcase packed, her goodbye polite but tinged with disappointment. She had tried these past days to bring life back to the manor, cleaning, talking, even placing a small wreath on the front door that he had promptly removed. "The invitation still stands," she had said before departing. "Grandmother always sets an extra place, just in case, just in case." As if the universe operated on such whimsical principles, Lysander turned from the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. The hunger was stronger tonight, a reminder of what he was, what he would always be. The synod would be furious if they knew he was even considering this breach of protocol. And yet, as the clock struck 7, Lysander found himself donning his coat, wrapping a scarf around his pale throat, and stepping out into the swirling snow. The cold didn't affect him, but appearances mattered, always appearances. The path to the village stretched before him, unmarked by footprints, pristine in its whiteness. Behind him, Vosper Manor loomed dark and silent, a monument to isolation. Ahead, the lights of the village beckoned, each window a promise of something he had forsaken centuries ago. Lysander took the first step, then another, snow crunching beneath his boots. For the first time in 342 years, the Vampire King was leaving his sanctuary, not to hunt, not to feed, but to accept an invitation from a human family who had no idea what they had invited into their home. The snow continued to fall, covering his tracks almost as quickly as he made them, as if nature itself was offering him anonymity for this one night of transgression. The village lights grew closer with each step, like stars descending to earth. Lysander paused at the edge of the small hamlet, where cobblestone streets replaced the snow-covered path. Warm golden light spilled from windows, casting long shadows across the snow. The scent of pine, cinnamon, and humanity mingled in the air, a potent mixture that made his throat constrict with both hunger and something else. Nostalgia, perhaps. A memory of warmth from before. Music drifted through the night. A piano somewhere playing carols, children's voices raised in song. Lysander followed the sounds, moving like a shadow between pools of lamplight. Villagers hurried past, arms laden with parcels, their breath clouding in the cold air. None spared him more than a curious glance. Here, he was not the Vampire King, merely a stranger passing through. The Kerry's cottage stood at the far end of the village square, its windows ablaze with light. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the scent of roasting meat and spiced wine wafted through the cracks around the door. Lysander stood before it, suddenly uncertain. Centuries of isolation had not prepared him for this. The simple act of knocking on a door, of being welcomed. His knuckles hovered over the weathered wood. He could still turn back. The manor waited, dark and familiar. Safe. The door swung open before he could decide. Lya's face brightened with genuine surprise, her cheeks flushed from the kitchen's heat. "I was just checking if the snow had stopped." The warmth from the house rushed out to meet him, carrying with it a cacophony of scents that made his senses reel: food, pine, wax, humanity. So many heartbeats under one roof. "I did," Lysander said, his voice sounding strangely formal, even to his own ears. "I hope the invitation remains open." "Of course." She stepped aside, gesturing him in. "Everyone's in the sitting room. Grandmother will be thrilled you've come." Lysander crossed the threshold, feeling a momentary resistance, an old superstition that vampires could not enter without invitation. Nonsense, of course. The synod spread such rumors themselves, to make humans believe they had some power over the night's children. The cottage interior was a riot of sensory impressions. Garlands of evergreen draped the walls, interwoven with red berries and ribbons. Candles flickered in every corner, their light reflecting off ornaments hung from a small fir tree in the corner. The air was thick with the scent of humans. 5, No, 6 distinct heartbeats, each with its own rhythm. "Let me take your coat," Lyra offered, reaching for the heavy wool. Lysander hesitated. His clothing was part of his disguise, the layers that made him appear more substantial, more human. But refusing would seem odd. He allowed her to take it, feeling strangely vulnerable in just his shirt and waistcoat. "This way," she said, leading him through a narrow hallway lined with framed photographs. Lysander glanced at them as he passed, generations of Kiris family members, their faces aging from frame to frame. How strange to document one's own decay so lovingly. The sitting room fell silent as he entered. 5 faces turned to him, expressions ranging from curiosity to open welcome. An elderly woman sat in a chair by the fire, her hands folded over a cane. Grandmother Olympe. He presumed. Her eyes, though clouded with age, held a sharpness that made him wary. "Everyone," Lycia announced, "this is Mr. Vosper, from the manor. Mr. Vosper, this is my family." "Lysander, please," he corrected gently. The formality of Mr. Vosper belonged to correspondence and ledgers, not this warm room with its beating hearts. "Lysander," Grandmother Olympa repeated, testing the name. "An ancient name. Greek, is it not? The liberators." "Yes," he replied, surprised. Few humans in this century recognized the etymology. "My family had classical interests." "As does ours," she said, gesturing to Lyra. "Lyra, sweetly speaking, though we find Lyra suits her better." A man rose from beside the fire, extending a hand. "Cassius Keris, Lyra's uncle. We've wondered about our neighbor for some time." Lysander took the offered hand, careful to apply just enough pressure to seem normal. The man's skin was warm, his pulse strong beneath Lysander's fingertips. It took considerable will not to let his grip linger, not to feel that life rhythm longer than propriety allowed. "The manor has been in my family for generations," Lysander said, the practiced lie coming easily. "I prefer solitude for my work." "And what work is that?" asked a younger woman, clearly Leah's cousin by the resemblance. "Historical research primarily," Lysander answered. "Family histories, local records." "How fascinating," Grandmother Olympe said, though her tone suggested she found it anything but. "Well, you're here now, and it's Christmas Eve. Leah, take him to the dining room. Dinner is nearly ready." Leah touched his elbow lightly, guiding him back to the hallway. The brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through him. How long had it been since anyone had touched him with such casual ease? "Don't mind, Grandmother," Leah whispered as they walked. "She's suspicious of everyone at first. By dessert, she'll be telling you family secrets." The dining room was small but arranged with care. A table that clearly spent most days pushed against a wall had been centered in the room and extended with leaves. Candles in silver holders cast a warm glow over mismatched china and crystal glasses that caught the light like captured stars. "It's not what you're used to, I'm sure," Leah said, a note of apology in her voice. "It's perfect," Lysander replied, and was surprised to find he meant it. The manor's formal dining room, with its long table that could seat 30, had not been used in decades. This room, with its evidence of daily life and hasty preparation, held more warmth than his entire home. The family filed in, taking their places with the easy familiarity of a ritual performed countless times. Lysander found himself seated between Lyra and her young cousin, with Grandmother Olympe directly across, her keen eyes missing nothing. The food arrived in a procession of steaming dishes: roast goose with crisp skin, potatoes glistening with fat, vegetables in butter, bread still warm from the oven. The scents mingled in the air, creating an aroma that Lysander found both enticing and repulsive. Food held no nourishment for him, had not for centuries. Yet his body remembered hunger, remembered the pleasure of taste. Wine, Cassius offered, holding a bottle of deep red liquid that made Lysander's throat constrict. Not for its alcoholic content, but for its color, its viscosity so similar to what his body truly craved. "Thank you," he said, holding his glass steady as Cassius poured. The wine swirled, catching the candlelight. Lysander raised it in the toast Cassius offered, to neighbors and new friends, and brought it to his lips without drinking. The meal began, plates being passed, conversations overlapping. Lysander watched carefully, mimicking their movements. He cut small pieces of meat, moved them around his plate, occasionally raised an empty fork to his lips. When necessary, he slipped food into his napkin, or beneath the edge of his plate. "You're not eating," Lysander quietly, her voice pitched for his ears alone. "A slight indisposition," Lysander replied. "The walk through the cold, perhaps. The food is excellent, though." She frowned slightly but didn't press. Instead, she filled the silence with stories, village gossip, family anecdotes, the history of their Christmas traditions. Lysander found himself captivated, not by the content, but by her animation, the way her hands moved as she spoke, the changing cadence of her voice. "And what of your family traditions, Mr. Vosper?" Grandmother Olympe asked suddenly, cutting through a story about last year's failed Christmas pudding. "I have none," Lysander answered. "Honestly, I've spent most Christmases alone with my research." A silence fell over the table, heavy with pity he neither wanted nor deserved. "Well, that won't do at all," Olympe declared. "Everyone should have traditions. Perhaps you'll borrow some of ours this year." The meal continued, but Lysander felt Lyra's gaze returning to him frequently, curious and considering, the candlelight caught in her dark eyes, turning them to liquid amber. Her heartbeat, distinct from the others now that he had attuned to it, quickened when their eyes met. Dangerous, this awareness. The Synod had strict rules about entanglements with humans, rules Lysander himself had helped create. Vampires who grew attached to mortals became unpredictable, emotional, vulnerable. As plates were cleared and dessert brought out, a rich cake soaked in brandy and set momentarily aflame, Lysander found the room increasingly oppressive. Too many heartbeats, too much warmth, too many eyes that might notice his lack of appetite, his too pale skin, his careful movements. "Would you excuse me for a moment?" he asked, rising from his chair. "I need some air." Lyra half rose as well. "I'll show you to the garden." "No need," Lysander assured her. "I'll find my way." He slipped from the dining room past the sitting room and into a small kitchen at the back of the house. Pots bubbled on the stove, tended by an older woman, another relative, he presumed. She nodded to him but continued her work. The back door stood ajar, letting in a thin stream of cold air to balance the kitchen's heat. Lysander stepped through it into a small garden, now covered in snow. The night embraced him, familiar and comforting after the sensory assault of the house. He drew in unnecessary breath, clearing his lungs of the mingled sense of humanity. The hunger clawed at him, sharper now after being surrounded by warm bodies, beating hearts. He should never have come. This experiment in nostalgia would only end badly. It can be overwhelming, can't it? Lysander turned. Lysanne stood in the doorway, her silhouette haloed by the kitchen light behind her. She stepped into the garden, pulling a shawl tighter around her shoulders. "The family, I mean," she continued, coming to stand beside him. "They mean well, but it's a lot all at once." "Yes," Lysander agreed, grateful for the explanation she had provided. "I'm unaccustomed to so much life." She laughed, the sound crystalline in the cold air. "That's one way to put it. I love them, but sometimes I need to escape too." She gestured to the garden. "Even in winter, this is my refuge." Snowflakes drifted down, catching in her dark hair like stars. One landed on her cheek, and without thinking, Lysander reached out to brush it away. His cold fingers touched her warm skin, and she didn't flinch at the temperature difference. "Your hands are freezing," she said, instead, capturing his hand between both of hers. "You should have worn gloves." The contact sent a jolt through him, not of hunger but of something else, a connection he had not felt in centuries. Her hands were small but strong, the fingers calloused from work. Human hands, mortal hands, that would age and wither while his remained unchanged. "I don't feel the cold," he said, the truth slipping out before he could catch it. "Everyone feels the cold," Leah countered, still holding his hand. "You just pretend not to." "Perhaps I do," Lysander admitted, allowing himself a small smile. They stood in silence for a moment, snowflakes falling around them, her warm hands still clasping his cold one. The hunger receded, replaced by a different kind of yearning, for connection, for understanding, for the simple pleasure of being seen. "Why did you invite me?" Lysander asked suddenly. "You know nothing about me." Leah considered this, her head tilting slightly. "I know you're lonely," she said finally. "The manor is too big for one person, and no one should be alone at Christmas." "There are reasons for my solitude," he said, the words a warning she couldn't possibly understand. "There always are," she replied. "But reasons can become excuses if we let them." A call came from inside, Grandmother Olympe, summoning them back for dessert and gifts. Leah released his hand, the warmth lingering like a ghost on his skin. "Come back inside," she said. "Grandmother's brandy cake is worth braving the family for, I promise." Lysander followed her back into the house, into the riot of warmth and sound and life. The dining room had been cleared. The family reconvened in the sitting room, where small packages wrapped in colored paper were being distributed. "We always open one gift on Christmas Eve," Leah explained as they entered. "The rest wait until morning." Grandmother Olympe looked up from her chair by the fire. "Ah, the wanderer's return. Just in time." She held out a small package to Lysander. "This is for you." Lysander stared at the offered gift, momentarily at a loss. "I've brought nothing," he said, the social failure acute after centuries of perfect manners. "Guests needn't bring gifts," Olympe said firmly. "Your presence is gift enough for Leah. She's been curious about the manor's occupant for months." Leah flushed, shooting her grandmother a look of betrayal. "Grandmother exaggerates." "I do no such thing," the old woman retorted. "Now take your gift, Mr. Vosper, and stop looking so alarmed. It won't bite." Lysander accepted the small package, the paper rough beneath his fingers. How long had it been since anyone had given him a gift? The synod exchanged favors, not presents. His human servants left offerings out of fear, not affection. Around him, the family opened their packages with exclamations of delight. Leah received a small book of poetry from her cousin, its leather binding worn with age. She ran her fingers over the embossed title, her pleasure evident in the quickening of her pulse. Lysander carefully unwrapped his own gift, aware of Olympe's keen gaze upon him. Inside the paper was a small wooden box, intricately carved with symbols he recognized from antiquity, protection sigils, warding signs. He opened it to find a silver key, tarnished with age. "It belongs to the manor," Olympe said, watching his reaction. "Found it in my grandfather's effects. Family legend says he worked there as a boy, before the estate closed itself off from the village." Lysander examined the key, recognizing it as one that would fit the manor's east wing, a section he had sealed off nearly a century ago, after the last of his human family line had died. "Thank you," he said, closing his fingers around the cool metal. "This is unexpected. Most gifts worth giving are." Olympe replied cryptically. The evening continued, brandy and sweet wine being served with slices of the cake Leah had promised. Lysander managed to avoid eating by engaging Cassius in conversation about local history, offering carefully edited anecdotes from his research that were in fact his own memories. As the clock neared midnight, the family began to disperse, the younger cousins to bed, Cassius and his wife to prepare for morning festivities. Soon only Leah, grandmother Olympe, and Lysander remained in the sitting room, the fire burning low. "I should return to the manor," Lysander said, rising from his chair. "Thank you for your hospitality." "Nonsense," Olympe declared. "It's nearly midnight and snowing heavily. You'll stay in the guest room." Grandmother Leah began, clearly embarrassed by the old woman's presumption. "I couldn't impose," Lysander said simultaneously. "It's not an imposition if I insist," Olympe said firmly. "Leah, show Mr. Vosper to the blue room. I'm too old to argue with stubborn young people in the middle of the night." With that declaration she rose with the aid of her cane and made her way from the room, leaving Lysander and Leah alone by the dying fire. "You don't have to stay," Leah said quietly. "But she's right about the snow. It's coming down harder now." Lysander knew he should leave. Every moment he remained increased the danger, to himself, to the synod's secrets, to this family that had welcomed him so openly. And yet, the thought of returning to the manor's cold emptiness after this night of warmth was suddenly unbearable. "If it's truly no trouble," he said, "I would be grateful for the accommodation." Leah's smile was worth the risk. "This way," she said, taking up a candle. "The blue room is small, but it's comfortable." She led him up a narrow staircase, the wooden steps creaking beneath their weight. The upper floor of the cottage was a warren of small rooms, their doors close together along a short hallway. Leah stopped at the last door, pushing it open to reveal a tiny bedroom with sloped ceilings and a single window that showed the falling snow. "It's not what you're used to," she said again, lighting a lamp beside the bed. "It's perfect," Lysander replied, and meant it. The room was simple but welcoming, a bed with a patchwork quilt, a small table, a chair beneath the window. A painting of the sea hung on one wall, its blues echoed in the faded wallpaper. "There are extra blankets in the chest," Leah said, gesturing to a wooden trunk at the foot of the bed. "And water in the pitcher. The washroom is at the end of the hall." She hesitated in the doorway, candle in hand, her face half in shadow. "I'm glad you came tonight," she said finally. "The manor has always seemed so lonely." "It is," Lysander admitted, "the truth easier in this small room, with only her to hear it. But less so now, I think." She smiled, the candlelight catching the amber flecks in her eyes. "Good night, Lysander." "Good night, Leah." She closed the door softly behind her, leaving him alone in the blue room. Lysander stood motionless for a long moment, listening to her footsteps retreat down the hall, to the soft closing of her own door. The house settled around him, creaking and sighing as old houses do. He moved to the window, looking out at the falling snow. The village lay quiet beneath its white blanket, chimneys sending thin spirals of smoke into the night sky. In the distance, barely visible through the snowfall, the dark silhouette of Vosper Manor stood against the horizon. For the first time in centuries, Lysander felt no desire to return to its familiar shadows. Here, in this small room with its patchwork quilt and faded wallpaper, he felt something dangerously close to peace. He did not need sleep, another luxury or necessity, depending on one's perspective, that vampirism had taken from him. But he removed his shoes and waistcoat, loosened his collar, and lay atop the quilt, hands folded over his chest, in a posture that would have amused the synod with its resemblance to the traditional burial pose. The house's heartbeats slowed around him as its occupants drifted into sleep. Lysander closed his eyes, Not to rest, but to better focus on the sounds. The wind in the eaves, the tick of a clock somewhere below, and beneath it all, the steady rhythm of Leah's heart 2 doors away. Dawn was hours off. He would leave before first light, slipping away without disturbing the family's Christmas morning. This night would become a memory, precious to him, quickly forgotten by them, as it should be. A sound outside the window roused him from his thoughts. Lysander opened his eyes, listening intently. Not the wind, not an animal. Footsteps in the snow, too light for human ears to detect. He rose silently, moving to the window. Through the falling snow, he could make out figures approaching the cottage. 3 of them, moving with the unnatural grace that marked them as his kind. The Synod had found him. Lysander's mind raced. How had they tracked him? Why tonight? Of all nights? The answer came with sickening clarity. They had always watched him, the reclusive king who had once led them. His departure from the manor after centuries of seclusion would have triggered their suspicion immediately. And now they were here, approaching a house full of sleeping humans. A house containing Leah. The lead figure looked up, as if sensing Lysander's gaze. Even through the snow, he recognized Corvinus, the Synod's enforcer. Their eyes met across the distance, and Corvinus smiled, a predator's grin that promised consequences. Lysander stepped back from the window, cold dread settling in his stomach. He had done this in his selfish desire for warmth, for connection. He had led wolves to the sheep. The Synod did not tolerate breaches of protocol, did not allow humans to glimpse behind the veil of secrecy that protected their kind. A soft knock came at the cottage door below. 3 measured raps, too precise to be human. Mr. Vosper. Grandmother Olympi's voice called from the hallway. There are visitors at the door. They're asking for you. I'll be right there, Lysander called, his voice carrying through the cottage with unnatural clarity. He moved to Leah's bedside, his fingers brushing her cheek with impossible lightness. Sleep, he whispered, infusing the word with power. Her breathing deepened immediately. The same command rippled through the cottage, ensuring the children would remain in their dreams. Only Olympa remained awake, standing at the top of the stairs in her nightgown, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "Who are they, Mr. Vosper?" she asked, her eyes sharp with suspicion. "They don't look like ordinary travelers, not in this weather." "Old acquaintances," Lysander said, moving past her with fluid grace. "Please return to your room. I'll handle this." Olympa's hand caught his sleeve. "They have a look about them, like you." Her gaze was penetrating, seeing too much. "Are they dangerous?" The knocking came again, more insistent. "Yes," Lysander admitted, "but not to you if you stay upstairs. Please, Olympus." Something in his voice must have convinced her. She nodded once, retreating to her room, though she left the door ajar. Lysander descended the stairs, each step measured. He straightened his shoulders, summoning the bearing that had once made armies tremble. The cottage suddenly felt small, confining, as ancient power stirred within him. He opened the door. 3 figures stood on the threshold, snow swirling around them without seeming to touch them. Corvinus at the center, flanked by 2 others, Marius with his scholar's face and executioner's hands, and Livia, whose delicate features belied the cruelty that had sustained her through centuries. "Your Majesty," Corvinus said, the title dripping with mockery. "How domestic you've become. What do you want?" Lysander kept his body positioned to block entry, though he knew the threshold would not stop them without an invitation. "The Synod sends its regards," Corvinus replied. "And concerns. You've been mingling, breaking protocols established by your own decree." His nostrils flared. "This place reeks of humanity and sentiment." "My affairs are not Synod business," Lysander said coldly. "Not anymore." Livia laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Everything is synod business, especially when our reclusive king suddenly develops a taste for peasant blood. I've harmed no one, Lysander said. No? Marius spoke now, his voice soft and reasonable. Then what of the woman? The one whose mind bears your touch. We can sense it even from here. Lysander's jaw tightened. They had sensed his connection to Lyra, the mental bridges he'd built during their conversations. You know our laws, Corvinus continued. No human may know of us and live, unless they serve. And this one, his lips curled. This one has seen too much of you, hasn't she? She's glimpsed behind the mask. She knows nothing, Lysander lied. Then you won't mind if we verify that ourselves. Corvinus stepped forward, pressing against the invisible barrier of the threshold. Invite us in, Majesty. For old time's sake. The air between them crackled with tension. Lysander could feel the weight of centuries in this moment, the rigid laws he himself had helped establish to protect their kind. No, he said simply. Corvinus's face hardened. Then we'll wait. Humans must emerge eventually, and when they do, he smiled, teeth gleaming in the darkness. The synod will ensure your secret dies with them. Behind Lysander, a floorboard creaked. He didn't need to turn to know who stood there. Mr. Vosper, Lyssa's voice, still thick with sleep. Is everything all right? Corvinus's eyes lit with predatory interest, looking past Lysander to the woman on the stairs. Ah, the object of fascination herself. Lysander felt cold fury rise within him. Lyssa, go back upstairs. But she was already beside him, peering at the strangers. Who are your friends? She asked. And then, with the hospitality ingrained in her, would you like to come in from the cold? The words hung in the air, an invitation uttered. The three vampires smiled in unison. How kind, Corvinus said, stepping across the threshold with fluid grace. The others followed, bringing with them the chill of the grave. Lysander moved in front of Lyra, a shield of flesh and ancient power. You will not touch her, he said, his voice dropping to a register that made the windows vibrate. We are merely accepting the lady's invitation, Livia said, gliding into the sitting room. Her eyes took in the Christmas decorations with amused disdain. How quaint. Playing at humanity, Your Majesty. Lyra looked between them, confusion giving way to unease. Mr. Vosper, what's happening? Who are these people? Old colleagues, Lysander said, not taking his eyes from the intruders, with whom I have a disagreement. More than a disagreement, Marius corrected, examining a handmade ornament with clinical interest. A fundamental breach of our most sacred laws. The sound of more footsteps came from above. Olympe appeared at the top of the stairs, her face set in stern lines. What's all this commotion? It's the middle of the night. Corvinus looked up, his smile widening. The matriarch, I presume. How fortunate. We can resolve this matter with all parties present. Resolve what matter? Olympe demanded, descending with dignity, despite her night clothes. Whether your family lives to see Christmas morning, Corvinus said pleasantly. The room went still, Lyra's breath caught, and Olympe froze on the bottom step. You will not threaten them in their own home, Lysander said, his voice deadly quiet. We merely enforce the laws you created, Corvinus replied. No human may know of our existence. This one, he gestured to Lyra, has seen too much, felt too much. Her mind bears your imprint, Lysander. She knows even if she doesn't yet understand. Lyra turned to Lysander, her eyes wide. What is he talking about? Lysander felt the moment balancing on a knife's edge. Centuries of secrecy, of careful isolation, against the truth that had been building between them since that first night in the manor. They believe I've told you something I shouldn't, he said carefully. And have you? She asked. Before he could answer, Livia moved, a blur of motion too fast for human eyes. She was beside Leah in an instant, fingers closing around her throat. "Let's not play games," Livia said. "The girl dies, as do all who have seen us. Clean, simple, as it has always been." What happened next occurred too quickly for human perception. Lysander moved, his form seeming to dissolve and reappear. One moment he stood 3 paces away, the next his hand was locked around Livia's wrist, squeezing with such force that the ancient vampire's bones creaked audibly. "You forget yourself," Lysander said, his voice carrying the weight of mountains. "And who I am." He flung Livia across the room with negligent strength. She crashed into the wall, plaster cracking around the impact. Before she could recover, Lysander was there, one hand pinning her by the throat. "I am still king," he said, each word precise and terrible. "I may have withdrawn from the synod, but I did not abdicate my power." Corvinus and Marius moved in tandem, converging on Lysander from opposite sides. He released Livia only to catch Corvinus's striking arm in mid-air, twisting it with savage precision. The crack of breaking bone echoed through the cottage. Marius hesitated, then lunged for Leah instead, a tactical error. Lysander intercepted him with blinding speed, driving him to the floor with such force that the wooden boards splintered beneath them. "You dare?" Lysander's voice had changed, resonating with harmonics no human throat could produce. His eyes blazed with an inner light, pupils contracting to pinpoints. "You dare threaten what is mine?" The 3 synod members regrouped, their movements wary now. Blood, black and viscous, seeped from Corvinus's twisted arm. "The law," Marius began. "I wrote the law," Lysander cut him off, "and I can unmake it." Throughout this impossible display of speed and strength, Leah and Olympe stood frozen, human minds struggling to process what their eyes witnessed. "What are you?" Olympe whispered, her hand clutching the banister for support. Lysander didn't look away from his opponents. "Something very old," he said. "Something that has walked this earth since before your ancestors built their first fires." The Christmas tree lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the room. Outside, the wind howled, as if nature itself responded to the ancient powers clashing within the cottage. Corvinus straightened, cradling his injured arm. "The synod will not accept this defiance," he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "The synod will accept what I decree," Lysander replied. "You forget, Corvinus. I withdrew from our politics but not from power. Would you like a demonstration of what I can still do?" He raised one hand, and the air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing down on the 3 intruders. They staggered, faces contorting in pain. "I could end you with a thought," Lysander continued, his voice terribly gentle. "Return to the synod. Tell them that Lysander Vosper has claimed this family under his protection. Any harm that comes to them will be revisited tenfold upon the perpetrator. And the secret?" Livia gasped, struggling against the invisible weight. "Will remain secure," Lysander said. "On my honor as king." He released the pressure, and the 3 vampires straightened, their faces masks of hatred and fear. "This isn't over," Corvinus warned, but he was already backing toward the door. "It is for tonight," Lysander replied. They went, slipping into the night, like shadows fleeing the dawn. In their wake, the cottage fell silent. The only sounds were the ticking of the clock and the ragged breathing of the humans. Lysander turned slowly to face Leah and Olympe, uncertainty in his ancient eyes. "I owe you an explanation," he said quietly. Olympe sank into a chair, her face pale but composed. "I suspected there was something different about you, Mr. Vosper. Though I admit, I didn't imagine this." Leah hadn't moved, her eyes fixed on Lysander. What are you? She echoed her grandmother's question. I think you know, Leah. Say it, she whispered. I am vampire, he said, the admission hanging in the air between them. The first of my kind in these lands. What your stories call the Vampire King. Leah's hand rose to her throat, where Livia's fingers had left faint marks. All this time, the manor, the night walks. How you never eat. Yes, and those people, they wanted to kill us? Because we know, that is our law, Lysander said. No human may know of our existence unless they are bound to us in service. It's how we have survived the centuries. But you protected us, Olympe said, her shrewd eyes assessing him. Against your own kind. Yes. Why? Leah asked, the simple question cutting to the heart of everything. Lysander looked at her, this woman who had brought warmth back into his endless night. Because, in all my centuries, I have never met anyone who made me feel human again, until you. The confession hung between them, fragile and enormous. What happens now? Leah asked. That depends on you, Lysander said. I have claimed you under my protection. The Synod will not dare move against you directly, but knowing what I am, that choice remains yours. Olympe rose from her chair, straightening her shawl with dignity. It's nearly dawn, she said practically, and tomorrow is Christmas. Whatever decisions need making, they can wait until after we've all had some rest. She fixed Lysander with a stern look. I assume you don't burn in sunlight, or some such nonsense. A surprised laugh escaped him. No, that's a myth. Good. Then you'll join us for Christmas dinner. I expect a full accounting of your age and history, Mr. Vosper. If we're to harbor the Vampire King, I want to know exactly what we're getting into. With that remarkable statement, she ascended the stairs, leaving Lysander and Leah alone in the damaged sitting room. Are you afraid of me now? Lysander asked softly. Leah looked at the splintered floorboards, the cracked wall, the physical evidence of what he was capable of. Then she looked at his face, the face that had watched over her as she decorated the tree, that had softened as children sang carols. I should be, she said. But I'm not. She took a step toward him. You could have killed them, couldn't you? But you didn't. I've had enough of death to last eternity, he said. She reached for his hand, her warm fingers closing around his cold ones. Then perhaps it's time you learned about living. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the footprints of those who had come and gone. Inside, a vampire who had forgotten how to hope stood hand in hand with a woman who refused to fear the dark. Between them, something impossible and fragile was taking root. Something that might, with care, survive the winter and bloom in seasons to come. In the east, the first pale light of Christmas morning touched the horizon, promising a new day.